Mr. Mellink, you are a consultant in digital business at Gartner. You have 25 years of experience in IT. What, in your opinion, will be the impact of the blockchain revolution?
Well, blockchain is an interesting new technology that came out a couple of years ago, and it's a little bit comparable to something that is new as it was new in 1993 when we had the internet just coming and the World Wide Web started to come there. It doesn't mean it's that big, but it's something that is really an interesting new technology. However, one of the things that we typically see when new technologies come aboard is that people would say it's fit for everything. It's like you own a hammer and you see everything is a nail. So if you look at the initial blockchain use cases, you could just as well say, why would you need a blockchain for that? You can just as well use a good database and a good application programmer interface to get to that same database. So the key thing here is to find things that we don't know yet what will come in the next number of years. When we had the internet coming, we had no idea we would have Facebook, we would have no idea that we would have social networks, but they came 10 years later.
But you're saying it's not certain that it will have this kind of impact, just like the internet, because some people at this event actually say that, it's going to be as big as the internet. But you don't agree?
Well, the impact of the internet is one of those foundation technologies that have changed quite a lot of things. However, we are already connected, and the way we're connected is going to change with blockchain. So there's the element of trust, and the key thing is that we see that there's changes that are happening with the economic systems that allow us to have programmatic code that we all agree that code is valid, that will have a binding legal contract. And those changes are quite fundamental. Yeah,
but back to the expectations, because sometimes I look through my Twitter timeline and it says, oh, blockchain will solve climate change, and blockchain will solve poverty, and blockchain will solve... And, well, as your company says, it's at the peak of inflated expectations. You have a hype cycle, which goes like this. Everyone is expecting this, and then the expectations go lower. Yeah. And you say, blockchain is over here, right?
Well, we publish our hype cycle every year, and we update it every year. And the blockchain is one of those components that are pretty much on the top of the hype. Although there are elements of blockchain like cryptocurrency for which we see the technology being more mature. That doesn't mean that technology and the whole cryptocurrency are all mature in itself. The technology itself is getting more and more mature. But the key thing about blockchain is not just the technology around the Bitcoin and the Ether that we all know about. And all the cases that are really scaling up are always about Ether, and they're always about Bitcoin. All the other cases where we'd see changes happening and where we'd say it's useful for everything, that is totally at the top of the hype, for the very simple reason that people would say it would solve anything. And that's not true. It's just that distributed database. It's the element of trust that's better taken care of than we could do in other ways, or actually alternative ways. But all the functionality, all the governance, and all the things we need to do to make it a working application and a working thing isn't changing fundamentally. You still have to code, and you have to still create applications that does the work that you want to be done.
So there's quite a lot of uncertainty, right? We don't know that a lot. But what can you say, one development that will be changed by blockchain? This is what we will see in the next 10 years or so.
Well, there's a number of use cases where there is a situation where there is a trusted party required to do a certain transaction, and we are very used to that trusted party. Actually, as humans, we typically want to be able, if we do something wrong or if we forget something, we want to call somebody and say, help me please. And in those cases, blockchain doesn't fundamentally help that part. However, there's places where you have already an untrusted environment. There is not a single person where you could go to help that, where blockchain could fundamentally think about that. And the idea is that we don't know yet what will change. If we just start replacing all the existing processes that we have, what banks do, what other notaries do, what all those kind of parties do, and actually the government, they have certain roles defined within the agencies that say this is your role. Why would you change that directly? That is not a necessity. You could do that. There's examples of countries where there's so much corruption in the government where you could say, well, maybe we should use a blockchain so we can prove there's no more corruption there.
Yeah, but if everything is functioning quite well, then why change it?
Why change it? Because there's alternative technologies that could work there as well to make it more user-friendly, to reduce costs. There's all kind of ways to do that. We're comparing technology that was developed 20 years ago, which may not be that user-friendly, with something that's new, but you still have to solve the other process problems and all the other things that you need to do. And blockchain will not inherently solve all those things immediately. It's a great technology, you can do certain things with that, but why solve that? It is something that you could think about how the internet developed. Certainly, at a certain point, everybody would say, we're going to get rid of all the shops. Everything is going to be online.
Right.
Well, you even see now that some of the online shops start to have physical shops again. Amazon just bought a whole food chain to kind of have a supermarket locally in places. So the combination is something that's great, and we will see new things that are even not there at this moment emerge in the next years.
So you were talking about 93 and the development of the internet, and of course it took quite a while before my mother had an email address, for instance. So when will my mother be using the blockchain? Maybe even without knowing it, because of course it's an infrastructure. When do you think that will happen? Will it take 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, that's always very hard to describe. People are often very optimistic in what will happen in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
If you talked about this same conference where we are here today, people will say it said 2 years ago, in 2 years we'll see that everybody's already using blockchain. Well, that didn't happen.
It looks nice in the newspapers now.
It looks nice, and it's something where you as a believer think that will happen quite quickly. However, that didn't happen. So we're always bad in predicting, and we're always overestimating something that happened in the first 2 years. But we are typically bad in predicting something that will happen in 10 years. So the change might be quite dramatic in 10 years, but it might be in something different. It's not like we're going to redesign everything we know now. We're going to find out new ways that we haven't found yet at this point.
Okay. Bart Mellink, thank you very much.
You're welcome.